Hey, math friends. Welcome to our week one book chat of Figuring Out Fluency. I'm so glad you were here. I'm checking on my phone to make sure that we are actually live and that it's playing and that I'm in the right place. So if you can hear me and see me, would you just comment and let me know so that way we're using a different platform? And so, okay, I see it. I now see us on YouTube. So we are here. Hi, everyone. So glad that you are here and joining us live, whether you are joining us live or watching the replay. We are going to be talking all about chapter 1 and 2. If you are here and you have not read yet, that is totally okay. You are welcome here. You can listen in. And I think after you listen in, you will be like, oh my gosh, I've got to go back and read the first two chapters. And if you are here and you have read the first two chapters, we have got a lot to talk about. So before I introduce myself, and have Christy introduce herself, even though I just called you Christy, so now everybody knows you're Christy. Say
You gave
hello in
it
the
away.
comments. I did. I gave it away. Say hello in the comments. Let us know what grade you teach, where you are watching from. I'd also love to know just like, what are you thinking about the book so far? I say this every year, but I'm like, I think this is like my favorite book we've ever chosen, but I'm also the person who like loves whatever moment I'm in. So I'm just obsessed with this book. So anyways, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Brittany Heggie. I am the original math brain behind Mix and Math, and I am joined by Christy. So, Christy, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hey, everybody. My name is Christy Harper. I was a third, fourth, and fifth grade math teacher for about 16 years, and for the last several years of that, I was also my school's math specialist slash interventionist slash math coach. And then just last year, I left the classroom to join Mix and Math full time. So now I am the lead content creator for Mix and Math, and so a lot of the any of the resources that you enjoy and all of that, that's my realm is
Yes.
blogs, YouTube, Mixed Math
I feel
360.
like we just kind of like tag team on all of the things. So,
Yeah.
and yes, me, former classroom teacher, math specialist, and doing Mix and Math and professional development, just like a little bit of everything. We just love math. We love math education. We love teachers who teach math, and of course, our math learners in classrooms. So, okay, we have got lots of wonderful people here. Rob teaches fourth grade, and then we've got Celeste, who's from Maryland, Liam from Southern Kentucky. We've got tons of teachers. I'm not going to be able to get to all of you, but we are so glad that you are here. So, the way that we are going to go through these live book chats, this one is going to be between Christy and I. We are going to talk about our aha moments. Y'all, we want you to be interactive and like engage in the conversation. We have got the comments pulled up. So let us know if you have aha moments that we don't address. Obviously, we've read your posts, but I'm kind of like keeping an eye on the comments. So that way I can respond if I see something that really stands out. But we are going to talk about aha moments from the book and just kind of like expand on certain ideas and just talk about like what this brought up for us. And then we will have a time of Q&A at the end. We went through all of the questions on the question post and we pulled, I think, 6 that were maybe like the most asked or, lots of people liked it, showing that obviously a lot of people had that same question. So we'll go through the Q&A and then we'll kick off week 2 going into chapter 3. So we should be here about an hour, maybe a little bit less, but super laid back, informal. We're just chatting about the book. Does that sound good? Give me a
Mhm.
thumbs up in the comments. So, all right. The biggest thing with these chapters is, and actually, you know what, Christy, I want you to jump into this because Christy and I were talking a little bit before, and she had a really good perspective on like just what these chapters are and how we can probably feel a little bit like, I don't know, just like our world has been changed when our definition of fluency has been changed. So why don't you kind of like jump into that? 'Cause I thought it was really valuable what you said.
Well, so Brittany and I were talking about how so many questions in the chat that we saw were related to how do I do this? Like, or people feeling anxious about maybe not knowing how to do it or not knowing enough. And my perspective on that is that almost was by design, I think, by the authors of this book, because they spent the first 2 chapters completely reframing our mindset around fluency. redefining it for us, like, I don't know, just shifting our mindset in terms of these fallacies that we maybe believed in, and then we feel bad about ourselves maybe for believing it. And so what they did, I think, was completely rock our world, and they like crumbled it in the first two chapters, and then they're going to spend the next several chapters rebuilding it for us piece by piece. Like there's an entire chapter on um, the key strategies. There's an entire chapter on practice, high quality fluency practice. There's an entire chapter on assessment. So a lot of these things that our heads are spinning about, like, oh my gosh, how do I do this? How do I bring this to the classroom? What practice do I do? How do I assess this? It is something that they're going to like systematically really deep dive into as we get through the rest of the book, which I think was brilliant because it keeps us reading. But what
Yes.
it does is if you read only the first two chapters and then stop, you feel like you're like on the edge of this precipice of, oh my gosh, I just completely wiped the slate clean of what I thought I knew about fluency, and now I need to like start from ground zero. But you don't. And if you're patient, or if you're impatient like Brittany and I, and you read ahead, then you'll know that it
Yes.
can help with that.
And that's what I was just thinking. I was like, as I was reading the aha moments and the questions, I felt like this like heightened level of panic a little bit. And I just want to like start before we dive into like talking about these first two chapters of like I just want to encourage everyone to be okay with not having all the answers right now. I cannot emphasize enough how much work and just intentionality went into this book. I've read the whole book all the way through, and so many of the things I felt myself like asking or being like, but what about this or what about this? Like it eventually comes. So be okay not having all of the answers yet. We obviously are going to talk about, questions. Um, but I think it's just really good for us to sit in this like, okay, fluency looks different. And that's actually a really good thing. Because for many of us, what we thought fluency was maybe didn't serve us as students. Like, how many of us here, let me know in the comments, is a teacher who formerly struggled as a student, who maybe didn't feel like you were a math person, who did not thrive the way that math was taught to you, who you feel like you're relearning math alongside your students, like as you're teaching it. And some of these strategies, you're like, oh, I don't even think about math in that way. Like, if that is you, then you know firsthand that it is a really good thing that our view of fluency has been shaken a bit. And now we get to like rebuild what that is. And actually, it brings me to there was a quote in the like the whatever the chapter is before the first chapter. And it said, fluency has been grossly oversimplified and therefore undertaught. And
Mhm.
I loved that because it gave it, to some extent, it allowed us to be like, okay, there has not been a lot of training and resources and just clarity around what fluency is. And so the fact that so much of this is like rocking our worlds um, is not really our fault. But now that we are gaining this knowledge, now we get to like do something different next year and the years to come. So,
Mhm.
um,
It
okay, go ahead.
The thing that I kept thinking about was like when you know better, you do better. And I
Mhm.
think that's just going to be our theme throughout this entire book is this idea of feeling like, wow, I thought this way and it feels like that was not correct anymore, but now I know better and I can change my ways. And I can't necessarily control everybody around me, but I can change my ways and I can control my classroom and my teaching and my beliefs. So I
Yeah.
think this is hopefully, I think this is going to be something that we'll come back to again and again throughout the
Yeah.
book, but
And
it
I
will
just
for
want to
sure get better.
Oh, yeah. I just want to acknowledge some of the comments because it's actually really interesting because some of the comments are saying, like, I actually was really good with math. Like, when it was just memorizing, like, I felt really confident. I felt great. And now that we're expected to teach for understanding and build, like, flexible strategies and all of that, that's actually the thing that is like rocking my confidence a little bit. And if that's you, I also just want to like give you a big hug and let you know that this is like absolutely a safe space to be uncomfortable, to still be in the process of, we are all here and still in the process of growing. There are certain strategies in the book. I actually talked to John C. and Giovanni about this. I was like, oh, this one strategy is one that's really uncomfortable for me. I still don't just think in that way. I don't gravitate towards this strategy. So know that if that is you and you're still very much feeling uncomfortable with teaching math in this way, it is okay. We are here to support you. That is why this community is here, and we will get there. So be patient with yourself. So let's oh, someone said my volume is lower and hard to hear. So let me turn up my volume. Thank you for letting me know.
I was just going to
Okay.
say
Is
the
that
input.
better? Hopefully that's better. Let's see. Is that better for you, Christy?
It's louder on my end, at least. Yeah, let
Okay.
us know in the comments if it's better for you all. And if we're more balanced, I don't want to be way louder than Brittany.
Hopefully it's not, but I mean, I can hear myself just great. So, all right, let's start with the definition of fluency. So, on page 3, it talks about how there has been a lot of work that has been a big body of work that has been put together that very clearly defines fluency, though I don't think that that definition is often used, or fluency is used or is misused and used in a lot of ways that do not align with this definition. But on page 3, it says fluency is being able to apply procedures efficiently, flexibly, and accurately. So Christy, do you want to jump in and kind of share like what that means to you?
That was a huge aha moment for me because it redefined my definition of fluency. Fluency is not an outcome. Like I used to think that fluency was what you would achieve when you got to a certain point of understanding. But now I'm like, I feel like my new definition is fluency is actions. Fluency is ongoing. Fluency is observable actions, but is not an outcome. It's not what you achieve. And that actually comes up again in chapter 2 where they talk about the difference between like mastery, automaticity, and fluency. Whereas like mastery is an outcome, automaticity is an outcome that you can achieve. Fluency is actions that are ongoing and that are always adapting and that are changing based on the situation or the problem that's in front of you. So that was one of my number one aha moments from chapter 1.
Yeah, and I had heard. So, does anybody have the Number Talk books? I think it's by. Is it Sherry Parrish? Is that the? I may mess up the author's first name. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's like the blue one, and then the fractions and decimals one is green. And so, if you have those books and you've been doing number talks, like I did number talks from those books, um, that definition of fluency was not new to me. Like that was the whole goal of number talks. But I think the part of fluency that was just like so eye-opening to me, in reading this book was very much the intentional um, learning experiences about choosing strategies. So it's not
Mm-hmm.
just like, okay, I've got all of these different strategies, but like we have to give students the opportunity to learn or yeah, or to teach them like, okay, or to even think about like, when is this strategy helpful and when is it not? When is the algorithm helpful? When is it not? And that is what I think was really missing in my fluency instruction is like I had the efficiency, flexibility, and accurately. I remember running around the classroom to try and show students like what efficiency was. I would run like directly to the board and then I would do like this whole thing around the classroom and be like, am I getting to the other side of the classroom efficiently? Like I remember doing that, but I never had that like intentional learning time of, okay, we have these 3 strategies, like which one's the most effective for this set of numbers to you or the most efficient for this set of numbers. So that was an aha moment for me reading.
I am a huge analogy person. That to me always helps me like clarify understanding in my head. And so the analogy that the authors used about fluency in math being similar to fluency in a foreign language, that helped it really drive home for me. And then there was somebody in their aha moments, and I forgive me because I cannot remember your name, but she was talking about how it's similar to rock climbing and how if like when you're rock climbing you need to like choose the most efficient path to get to where you need to go, and so you need to think about both the big picture of what's the end goal of where you need to get to, and then the small details of where are my handholds, where's my next foothold,
Mm.
once I go to that foothold, what's my next one after that. And so it's really I know that to me just helped really clarify. I love the analogies, just really helped me understand in my brain like this difference between, what it means to be fluent as an outcome, which is what I sort of believed before, versus fluent as an action, and fluency as this ability to adapt and be flexible and choose the right strategy and change your strategy if need be, right?
Yeah. Okay, so let's stick with that analogy because another thing that I really loved that the book said, and this was on page 6, they said the efficiency of an appropriate strategy changes relative to the numbers and the individual student. And so if we're sticking with this like rock climbing analogy, someone who is like what might be efficient for someone who is 5'2" is going to be very different than something that's efficient for me being 5'10". And
Yep.
so I love that in that it depends on where students are at in like their confidence with certain strategies. It depends on the numbers, like how you approach something's going to be different dependent on what mountain you're on or whether it's rocky or rainy or whatever. So I love that analogy. And I love this idea that there isn't one right efficient way. It's dependent on the student and the numbers. And I actually think that goes back to kind of what I was saying, this strategy that I was talking about. I'm not going to give it away because I talked to John about it, but this strategy that is just really uncomfortable to me. Like my brain does not work in this way. For one student, or for student, teacher, whoever, that strategy may be really efficient for them. But for me, if my brain just does not think in this way, it is going to take me forever to apply the same strategy with the same set of numbers. And so um, I love that they just kind of like called that out because I hadn't necessarily considered efficiency in that way. I think when I was thinking about efficiency in our number talks, it was very specifically of like this strategy is the most efficient for this set of numbers, and that's not necessarily the case for everyone.
Hmm. Hmm. I found too that a lot of times when I've learned a new strategy that didn't come naturally to me, I look for in the future. Then I look for more opportunities for it, and then suddenly they're all around me. I don't know what that it's some kind of
It's
effect,
like the
right? Where
red
it's like
car effect or something like that.
whatever. Yeah, I forget what it is. Where you didn't realize something exists, but once you realize something exists, suddenly it's everywhere. Like
Mhm.
that happens to me with strategies as well, where I'll learn a new strategy and then I'll suddenly realize, oh my gosh, I could use that in so many different ways. And so it is absolutely, and it goes back to if you all have known me with mixed math for a while, I love brain based learning research. It
She's
just
got
goes
a
back to
podcast
this whole
episode on it. You got to check it out.
episode if you're interested. But our brains are so flexible, and our brains are, there's plasticity in our brains so that we can make these new neural connections. And then the more we make those connections, the stronger it gets. And it really is physically stronger and mentally stronger as we practice it and as we do it more. So
Yeah, and this is another one that I think came up a lot of like, what does practice look like? Or like, how do we get students to practice this? There is an entire chapter all about practice. It is a fantastic chapter, so hang in there. But I think that sometimes like practice is this is a very strong word, like demonized, like that we shouldn't um, practice, but like our brains need practice and students need practice. It's just how we practice and what we are practicing. And that was actually another like aha moment for me, or something that just really stood out to me was I think it was page 10 where the authors were talking about um, choose, change, check, like
mhm.
actually being intentional to practice like checking for reasonableness. Oh my gosh. Oh my hair's a little a little wild. We before we got on the call today, I was like, my hair's wild and I look very orange today. I'm not 100% sure what's going on with the lighting in this room, but I look very orange. So, anyways, um what was I saying? Intentional practice.
Choose, change, check on page
Oh,
10, the
yes.
for reasonableness. Yeah.
Yes, and actually, and I think a lot of people commented about this, is just this idea of one, we can assess reasonableness at different parts in the solving process, and also that this is something that students have to practice doing.
And this idea that um, this idea of explicitly teaching metacognitive strategies. Metacognitive meaning thinking about your thinking, right? That students can be explicitly taught to think about their thinking, and that like this choose change check, and checking for reasonableness really is that. And the more you can explicitly teach these strategies that teach students to think about their thinking, that's the key, I think, to flexibility, or to fluency, excuse me, because now they're suddenly paying attention to, what did I choose to do there? Why did I choose to do that and not this? Is there maybe a better way? Like, it opens up this whole world of thinking about your thinking. And that to me is what fluency is all about. Is you have to be aware of what you're doing and when you're doing it. And so I actually, something I wrote in the comments here, because I work, and I saw a few people actually commented about this in the comments as well, was I worked with a ton of kids who had executive functioning deficits, ADHD, issues with prioritization and organization of their thoughts, and being able to see the big picture and these small details at the same time. And really, that's what studies have shown to help students bolster their executive functioning skills, is these explicit metacognitive strategies. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is such a brilliant way to do that, because this is what those kiddos would have such a hard time doing. They would not naturally stop and think about their thinking when they're in the middle of a math problem. But if we teach them these explicit strategies and they have some sort of anchor to remind them to do it, like this chart on page 11, or reminders from the teacher, that sort of thing, then suddenly it does become habit for them, and they are able to actually develop these executive functioning skills that they maybe were lacking in before. So it's so, I that to me was a huge aha moment, where I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be good for so many different types of learners.
Yes. And that was something that I think just continued to surprise me throughout reading the first two chapters and really the whole book, was just how much students were, the activities, the routines, just how much we were asking students to think about their thinking. I think
Mm-hmm.
that for me, as I'm like reflecting in my own practice, I very much would be like, okay, what were you thinking? But then I think it's even like a step further of like, why did you make that decision? Like, why did you choose to use that strategy? Why did you choose to use that representation? So I think it's just like a step further than I've gone. And so I'm really excited to, you know, get back with students to be able to kind of like test some of this stuff out and see how it changes
Mm-hmm.
our conversation, to see, um, something that John said is, he was like, we have to trust students and listen to their voices, listen to their thinking. And so I think some of us we're all in different places with this. Like, some of us are like, oh my gosh, I've never asked students this. And others of us are like, we just need to go a little bit deeper and really reflect on like why they made um, certain decisions. Because this, when we are talking about fluency, um, I highlighted this. It was something about, helping students to become decision makers, relying on their own thinking. And I think that is
Mm-hmm.
like the power of fluency in this way compared to what we thought fluency was before.
Because that exactly leads into the other major theme for me in chapter one, which was this whole idea of fluency being an access and equity issue, right? This whole
Mm-hmm.
idea of giving students agency over themselves as math thinkers, and giving them the power to choose their path, and to think about why they chose that path, actually defend why they chose it, or the flexibility of changing it if they need to, and then having it work or not work, and then push through that if it didn't work. That's what builds this confidence, and it helps them build these math identities of themselves as having the ability to do math, that I am a mathematician who can do this. And so that to me was, it just all flows together so nicely from this whole idea of, if we're teaching students these skills, it pays off in so many other ways. Because I mean, Brittany, you and I have talked about this probably so many different times, but math confidence and math identity is at the heart of students learning. If students don't believe they can learn, they can't, right? it is a self-fulfilling prophecy almost. If they say I can't do it, they're not going to be able to do it. But if they say they can, then they can. And that's that math identity and that agency and the way that we help develop their confidence is so related to that.
Yeah, and that actually ties really closely into, on page 16, it said, "Learning someone else's rules and unsuccessfully carrying them out leads to self-doubt and defeat." And so when
Hmm.
we think about our students who struggle and we think we just need to teach them this one way, we need to not confuse them, like, and we narrow in on, like, let's just teach them the algorithm, or let's just teach them this one way of solving. When they don't own that strategy, when they don't know the thinking behind it, and when they then struggle, that creates that, exactly what you said, that self-doubt, that lack of confidence that they can do math, that they can make sense of math. So, I think that is, and I can't remember if we pulled a question about this or not, so I may be getting ahead of myself, but I think there's a lot of worry that if a student is struggling, we need to not overwhelm them with a lot of strategies. And this book is actually saying the exact opposite. Like, it it is that student and all students who need multiple strategies, so they don't have to go into a problem that probably could be solved mentally with a strategy, and then mess up with the computation of it because that's the only way they know how to do it. So multiple strategies, giving them multiple ways to go about solving a problem, actually builds their confidence and, um,
Hmm.
helps them see that they can do this. They can make sense of math.
So, what would you say to people who are asking, like, what is one first step that I can take towards that? Like, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts on that are that's one of the questions that we pulled. So I'm like, should we
Oh
just go
yeah,
ahead and dive into it?
sure. Let's do it.
Okay. Actually, you know what? No, because I don't know exactly which question it is. We are going to come back to that though, because we do. I think we have that exact question from a teacher.
Okay.
So we will come back to that. We just have a few more like aha moments. I know one of the things that was something that a lot of teachers talked about was the difference between strategies and representations. That was another
Mhm.
one that stood out to me. Um, and just the fact that these are, I think that these words are used interchangeably, but they are not the same thing. I know that was something you had mentioned when we talked
Yep.
beforehand.
I know. So we were even just talking about this. I am in the middle of writing a blog post on multiple representations for Mix and Math, and Brittany was reading through my draft last night, and I think there was two or maybe three different times that Brittany actually caught me where I said strategy and I meant representation, and she goes, "Oh, do you mean representation here?" And she was very kind about it, but I was like, "Oh my gosh, I fully." I am somebody who has even thought about this before, consider myself well versed in the difference between strategy and representation. And I'm writing a blog post on it. And I even interchange the words, unknowingly a couple of times. And so this whole idea of how a strategy is what you do and how you think about the math. It's your framework or your schema for understanding the math versus the representation is how you show that.
Hmm.
That's that's huge to me. And so that's another thing too that I just think making explicit and teaching explicitly to students is so important. Like there are so many kids who I'll say, "Well, what was your strategy for that?" They go, "I did that in my head." I'm like, mental math is not a strategy. Like, what did you do in your head and what you
Yes.
saw
What were
in
you
your head?
thinking?
That's your strategy. What was your thoughts? Did you have a mental image of something? Were you thinking about numbers in a certain way? What did you do first, next, last? That's your strategy. So, that to me is also just that was a huge aha moment in chapter 2. I think they really talked about um, that clarity behind the language of
Well,
strategy and representation.
yes, and I actually think too, like, I wanna be like, call this out, is, like, even within our head, we can have both strategies and representations. Because I was working with, a group of students, and they were kind of, like, explaining what they were doing, but they were like, "Oh, but I saw this, like, counters." And I was like, so they had, because they had experience with manipulatives, they had like a mental image. Like the strategy was them moving counters over to make a group of something else. Like that was the strategy. Um, it wasn't, it was. it was essentially make a 10. We weren't working specifically within 10, but it was essentially the strategy of make a 10. But in their head, they were doing this with counters. And so I have, we talk all about representations. If representations is something that you're like, this is new to you, we have an entire free workshop that we're running throughout the summer. It's called the Make Math Hands-On Workshop. We talk a lot about using math manipulatives effectively, but with embedded in all of the different representations. So if that's something that you want to sign up for, like I said, it's free, it's 90 minutes, and I love representations. But that is different. That is how we show the strategies. So I think that like being clear on those is really helpful, because here's why else I think this is really good is because someone, oh goodness, I just keep jumping ahead to our questions. We've got such great questions, so I don't want to like go ahead and answer it. But if we do not make connections between the representations, students feel like they are just solving it a bunch of different ways. Like if you think about, like, let's say there are 3 different strategies for solving a problem, but then we could represent that with manipulatives and a number line and an algorithm. Okay, so now that's 6. And it's like, no, wait, like using a number line, using whatever fraction tiles, and then using an algorithm are all different representations for the exact same way of thinking. And that is where we actually move instruction to a place that doesn't feel like overwhelming or like we're confusing students or that we're giving them too many different ways to solve things. It's like we're not giving them too many different ways to solve things. We are giving them different ways to represent their thinking. Some that might be used better off depending on the numbers, depending on the situation. So that's my like little spiel on representations and strategies. This is something I'm very passionate about.
Yep. And to highlight what you were saying, the key to making it not feel like it's a bunch of different isolated ideas that will overwhelm students is to connect them and just to help students see the connection across how this strategy or this representation shows the same thing as this representation, the same thinking, just in 2 different ways or even 3 different ways. So that's just such a huge definition, a huge highlight, I think.
Yeah, and I think so, especially when we're talking about like, we are coming from the lens of like upper elementary. If you look at the standards across the years, it is a lot of times it is maybe the same strategy, but we're using progressively like more abstract representations. So if we're like thinking about it, like thinking about multiplication, like in 3rd grade, we're probably using like square tiles and counters to show multiplication. And then we start moving to in 4th grade, we might use like base 10 blocks and like grid paper to show multiplication. And then we start moving towards like an open area model or an algorithm in 5th grade. So again, I think that's why the definition of like representation and strategy is so important, because we keep the strategy the same, but we're using different representations. So I don't know. The book doesn't go into, I think the book talks a lot about how it is important. I think it's maybe the chapter 3, or maybe it was chapter 2, but it talks a lot about the fact that students need that experience with concrete manipulatives. We need the representations, like that's building the conceptual understanding. But this book focuses on like, what do we do from there? How do we build on conceptual understanding? Actually, that was a quote that I pulled. It was, let me see. It said the development of students' conceptual understanding of procedures should precede and coincide with instruction on procedures. And so learning is supported when instruction on procedures and concepts is iterative and explicitly connected. So all of that to say, we want to be building conceptual understanding. Procedural fluency comes from that conceptual understanding, but it should all be based on that understanding. We're building on that. I think this book gives us kind of the roadmap to, okay, they've got the understanding, but now how do we take the next step, which is pull out that fluency from that understanding or build the fluency upon that understanding.
Was that quote from page 38? I know people are going to be.
Yep. Oh, sorry. 38.
Page 38. Yep. Because it's so funny. I have almost all the exact same quotes underlined that you have. So
that's funny because we work together. We have like the same brain.
I think our lens is very similar through which we're reading this for sure.
Yes. Okay, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that really stood out to me. Oh, I think the other thing that I saw a lot in the aha moments was this idea that carrying out an algorithm is a low level of engagement, of cognitive engagement. I think that was a big shift for a lot of us, thinking that a lot of times I think that the algorithm is kind of like raised up as like that is the end goal. That's the thing that is like the most challenging. When really, if we're looking at the chart on, I wonder what page that was on. Let me look real quick. The
Um,
great
I
chart.
just
Um,
36 and
mhm.
37.
Yep, 36 and 37. If we look, that like level one, that low level cognitive engagement is remembering an algorithm or method and correctly carrying it out. But if we look at that high level of cognitive engagement, it's judging the usefulness of the algorithm or well of a strategy, knowing when to use it, comparing different methods, that was a huge aha moment, I think, for a lot of us because we spend so much time trying to get students to the algorithm, but that's not the high level of thinking.
So much of this while I was reading it made me think about why we teach math nowadays and how a lot of times, especially, so this also goes to people who are saying like, what was wrong with the old way? Like, what's up with this new math? Why are we teaching this new math? Well, it's because the purpose of learning math now, I truly believe this, is very different than the purpose of learning math 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
30 years ago, the purpose of learning math was to solve problems in an efficient way. And so maybe the algorithm really was this pedestal. I mean, I'm saying 30 years ago because that's when I was in fourth and fifth grade. Um, and so the algorithm really was kind of this be all end all because calculation was the end goal there. You learned math because you learned how to calculate. Now everybody walks around with a calculator in their pocket. I have my smart speaker, I have my phone with me all the time. Calculation is not the goal anymore. It's not enough to just teach kids how to calculate. We want to teach kids how to think mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so much beyond, that's so far beyond just being able to calculate and just being able to get a correct answer. And so that to me was what I kept thinking about as I was looking at the charts on page 36 and 37 and reading that fluency fallacy number 8, which was this whole idea of we want to teach kids how to think. We don't just want to teach kids how to calculate because
Mm-hmm.
any computer can get the right answer if you type the numbers into it. But the purpose now is to communicate about math, to think flexibly about math, to be problem solvers and thinkers in our real world problems that we are facing that require like lateral thinking, mathematical thinking that is not calculation based. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And so that to me, I think is really what it comes down to when we're thinking about the difference between these level one um, ideas versus the level three ideas. Is we don't want kids just knowing procedures and how to calculate anymore. We want them actually to be analyzers and creators and evaluators so that they're learning this way of thinking as opposed to just being able to get answers.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that you're saying. And I also think, too, I'll just add to this. I've been thinking a lot about this in the sense that if we only know the algorithm, and I'm not trying to like hate on the algorithm, that's not my intention, but if we only know this one way, and it is the algorithm to, like, let's say divide fractions, because that was the thing that came up for me today, it almost forces us into a level of precision that like isn't always needed. Like a lot of times in life, an estimate is like it is good enough for what we need in the situation. Like I was, scooping out
Mhm.
my collagen and I needed like 2 tablespoons, but I only had a fourth clean. And like I was, if I had to actually be like, okay, what is 2 divided by 1/4? And I had to, you know, do keep change flip or I had to convert to a decimal and then put it in my calculator. It's like, it's just so much easier for me to be able to recognize like, there's 4/4 in a whole and then there's 2 wholes. So times that by 2, you know what I mean? So it's like, I actually think that there's a lot of like freedom and efficiency in having strategies outside of just the algorithm or just that one way. So I don't know. And that's something I see continue to come up in life for me.
Yeah. Yep. Because usually, yeah, exactly. Usually, exact calculations are not actually necessary. You need to have some sort of number sense or like some sort of sense of what it's going to be. And that actually takes way deeper understanding to be able to estimate or to use to rely on your number sense to figure something out than to know exactly what algorithm to type into the calculator or to what algorithm to write and solve for, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's jump to our questions because we have such we y'all asked such wonderful questions, and so we've already kind of like been hinting at them. So let's go ahead and jump in. So this first question, and actually this was like a combination of questions. The first one was like, how do we get started with this? Like, what does it look like to incorporate fluency instruction and practice into curriculum that you don't get to design? When and how often? Where do you find the time? Oh, this wasn't the one. It does have multiple questions, but it kind of all is just like, where do we start? How do we incorporate this? I will say that there is a chapter all about practice. I think it is chapter five,
It's,
maybe, or six. It's
it's one of
six.
the, mhm.
And this entire chapter is about practice. It gives you ideas for when to include this in your like in your math block. It is not this like additional thing that you have to do on top of what you were doing. It's really can be integrated in. So I don't want to like spoil it and just, tell you exactly what the author said, but this is a moment where I'm like, just hold tight. Or if you want to peek ahead, you're not going to spoil anything by peeking ahead. Look at some of what they've shared. But as far as the like, how do we get started with this? I think, Christy, I know you've got some thoughts on this, so I'll let you jump in. But I will just start by saying I'm very much someone who is like all or nothing thinking. I'm like, we got to completely change everything. And I'm working myself to be like just more iterative and 1% changes. And I think even just having an awareness of fluency in this way allows for a different approach. But it can be as simple as, I don't know, asking that question to get students to think about their thinking in your number talk, to rather than having like the number talk like maybe the way that you've done it. It's like, okay, here's the set of problems, like which of these strategies that might be helpful. We can keep talking about this, but Christy, I want to hear what your thoughts are on like, where do we start with this?
Mm, so my advice is always choose one thing. Just
Hmm.
choose one thing that you can do that uh, that will that feels doable. That feels like something that you can integrate in next year or start next year or start doing tomorrow if you're still teaching. Either way, choose one thing. Maybe it is like Brittany said, it's changing your questioning. When a student, when you're talking about a problem with the whole class and a student raises their hand and gives an answer, if you are not in the habit of asking like, what was your strategy or what was your thoughts about that, maybe that's it. That's your one thing. You're changing up your questioning and holding kids more accountable
Hmm.
for explaining and communicating about their strategies and their thinking. Maybe that's it. Or maybe it's opening up to other strategies. Say, if you are somebody who you're talking about a problem and a kid explains their thinking and they've done it and it looks beautiful and correct and you are ready to move on, typically, maybe you say, what's another strategy that we could have used? And
Hmm.
you have students consider that there is another way or another thought process, or you allow another student to have their voice in how they shared it. Those are two, I think, really easy first places to start that you can do no matter whether you have a mandated curriculum that you have to follow to fidelity and cannot change, or if you are somebody who is, has a little bit more flexibility in your curriculum. You don't have to feel like you are making anything new or changing these curriculums or adding something new to your plate. It's just maybe this shift in how you talk and how you hold students accountable for their thinking. Um, that's my advice is choose one place to start, and then you'll be so surprised how quickly it snowballs into like 5 or 6 things, and then suddenly you have made major changes.
Yeah. Well, something else that I'll add too is one of one of the things I actually think we have sent this out in several newsletters. So if you do not get the Hey Math Friend newsletter, it is a newsletter that we send out like every other week? Um,
Uh-huh.
but I think at least twice in the last year that we've sent out the newsletters, we have sent out like lists of questions to ask. And I used to actually keep one of those that we sent out. I kept that exact one on a checklist, like by my at my teacher desk, because I just love having. I mean, there's so much conversation about the power of questioning, right? Like the questions that we ask students have a huge impact on the learning experience. And so I love having these questions. So this totally may not resonate with you, but if you're like me, I tend to highlight like all of the really just like great questions that they're asking, and we'll put them in like a note document and be like, oh, I didn't think to ask that question. And so just pulling out the questions, and then maybe like for that week, that your focus is like, okay, I want to ask this specific question. And like that is that focus. And then that eventually becomes like habit to ask
Mhm.
students. Like it's kind of like what do you notice? That was, I feel like relatively recently, like, what do you notice? What do you wonder? That was kind of like everywhere. And so now it's kind of for a lot of us like a gut instinct to be like, oh, what do you notice? Like, what patterns do you see? And that's because we've asked it so many times. And so for me, a really practical way to like start is pull out all of the questions that I see that really speak to me, and then just have those kind of handy whenever you get back into the classroom with students.
Yeah, 100%. Start small.
Yes, absolutely start small. Everybody in this book study is already in a better place because we have a different view of fluency. We will approach it differently, even if that is just a 1% change. So,
Hmm.
um, okay, let's see. We had our next question. When working with older elementary students, how do we break the habit of just getting the correct answer and having students slow down and think about what they are being asked to do or answer? I pulled this one because I feel very strongly about this.
Yes, go
um,
ahead.
so, if we are wanting to move students away from just being focused on the correct answer, then we have to change the questions we're asking. If the goal of the question is like, what is the answer? What is how much do they have altogether? How much, whatever the question is, if the goal is to get the answer, then that is what students are going to focus on. But there are plenty of other ways that we can get students engaged in math where the answer is not the goal. Maybe the answer is given to them. And like one of those ways, I wrote this down, but worked samples, like where students are looking at a piece of work that's already solved by another student, or I used to do this where I would like pretend that I was Taylor Swift and solve it and be like, I had Taylor Swift's fifth grade math homework. And they would, but they're looking at work that has already been solved. And the goal there is to be like, oh, it looks like some of this got erased. Like, how would you finish this? How would you complete this work? Or where's the error? Or, I mean, so there's so many different ways that we can change the question so that it's not necessarily that we are telling students like, show your work, don't focus on this. The nature of the question brings that out of them. Does that make sense?
Yep. No, 100%. And um, I 100% agree with all of that. And I have one more thing to add to it, which is also it comes down to also, I think, your class culture and the way that you build your class culture around what's valued in your class. If you are, um, you know, if if you value things above speed and accuracy, you can't just allow students to show speed and accuracy, or allow those students who have speed and accuracy to be the ones with the loudest voices in the classroom. um, you, you have to show that you value multiple perspectives by
Mhm.
asking, are there any other ideas? You have to show that you value thinking over answers by asking, what was your thought process, or talk to me about your strategy, or are there any other strategies that could have worked here? You as a teacher set that culture in your classroom, and so the way that you demonstrate your thinking, and also the way that you respond to students, I think, when they are so quick to just, I got the answer, here it is right here. The way that you respond to them and either um, acknowledge and warm demand or why push them forward versus say yes and move on really sets that culture, I think, of what's valued, and this idea that you value thinking over answers.
Yeah, I remember sharing about this in our last book study, because I think like right before the book study, I was working with a small group of students, and the I could feel the pressure, like the time was running out for the class period, and it was like we were trying to finish up the couple of problems, and I was asking a student, I was like, "What'd you get?" And they were like, "Got it." And I'm like, "Yep, that's right." And then moved on. Okay, what'd you get here? Yep, that's right. And moved on. And I was like, and I reflected on that, and I was like, I just I just showed students what I valued without saying it. Like in
Hmm.
that moment, I showed them like I just valued. I just wanted to know that you got the correct answer. I would have been better off and more aligned to what I truly value if I would have said, you know what, we're running out of time, but let's cover this last one, like just this one. Like, how did we approach it? And I think that that is just students see what we value based on our actions more than like what we say. And so that was just one of those moments for me where I was like, oh, I would totally go back and handle that situation differently. I'm not beating myself up over it, but it just really stood out to me.
Hmm. And if that happens once in a while, that's one thing. But if 90% of your class is not like that, it's not going to make or break the the class culture, I think.
Yeah. Or let me also just say, or if we only ask students about their thinking when they're wrong. Like
Yes, that's a good one.
how many times have we worked with students, especially our students who are part of like an academically gifted program, and you ask them like, why did you do that? Or tell me about your thinking, or like anytime they are questioned, it's like, oh my gosh, did I get it wrong? And it's like, no. So it's I think also just being equally asking those follow-up questions both when they're right and when they're wrong.
You, I don't even have to tell all of you in this room because I'm sure you've all seen this, but I have asked students, "What's your thinking?" And they immediately start erasing because they think they're wrong.
Yes.
I'm like, no, 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 no. And at the beginning, I have to say, "You're correct. You're right. I just want to know your thinking. Tell me about
Right.
your thought process." So for some of those kids at the beginning, they're like, they really are so programmed to like feel this way and feel like the rightness is valued over everything that you almost have to really start soft with them, and like they're like, you got to kind of like baby them like little lambs, and then then eventually they start to realize, oh, this is just what she does, and then
Yeah.
by like
Like you said, the
February of the
culture
school
though. Yep, they've
year.
gotta know
Yes.
that that's the culture. So,
Yeah.
okay, this one, we are not gonna dive into this one, but this was like the most asked question. What would a fluency-based assessment look like? And the reason that we are not gonna get into this, and I remember I said we've gotta be okay with not having all the answers right now, is because there is an entire chapter all about assessment, and it is chapter, so if you want, I mean, you can obviously go find chapter 7, I believe. What does assessing fluency look like? So if you want to skip ahead and peek at it, go for it. But it is a great chapter, and I think it will answer a lot of these questions. And also, it looks different than how we've been assessing fluency in the past. And that's because fluency is different than probably what we thought it was in the past. So either peek ahead or be okay with not having all the answers. So I know that that's probably not the answer everybody wanted to hear tonight.
We'll get into it in chapter 7, I'm sure.
Um, okay, this one. How can we
This
help
is a good one.
students become procedurally fluent if they struggle to move beyond concrete representations? This is another one that I'm like, come to the Make Math Hands On workshop because this is literally exactly what we talk about. A lot of times we use concrete representations with the wrong goal. We use it to help them like get an answer, get an answer, get an answer, and then we take them away, they struggle. And it's because we've missed the point of why we use concrete representations. And it's to build that understanding. And so I'm not going to we only have 6 minutes left of our book chat tonight. So I'm not going to get too in depth with it. But if you go to mixandmath.com/workshop, I believe, you can sign up for that. That's literally that 90 minutes is all about representations and specifically how to use concrete representations um, effectively. So, um, okay, I'll let you, I feel like I've just like dominated all of the questions. So why don't you take this question?
Okay, I feel like fifth grade. I teach fifth graders who are for the most part at ground zero in fluency. What is the most effective and efficient way to bring these learners up to speed? Um, I'm a huge believer in teaching through grade level content. That just because these fifth graders may not necessarily have fluency from third grade level content doesn't mean that we can't teach them fifth grade level content and work on that fluency through that fifth grade level content. And so, actually, this is something that Brittany and I were talking about just before, and we were talking about how a lot of the strategies and this was a question that came up too, as people were saying, like, what are the key strategies, what are some of the must know strategies? Those are gonna those the authors get into those really really nicely in the next couple of chapters. And so um so sorry to say this again, but we're not going to talk about what the strategies are. Well, we won't get it deep into them, but let's say there's a strategy like make a 10, and students are not fluent with make a 10 with addition and subtraction, but that comes up again in fifth grade when you're adding and subtracting fractions or decimals, and it carries over. It's not no longer make a 10, it's make a 1. So it's like it's making a friendly number, right? Is I don't know exactly if that's the right term for it.
Yeah.
And so what we can do is be really strategic about the numbers that we choose when we are teaching that skill with fractions and decimals. It's much easier, of course, for a student to recognize that strategy would be efficient when they're adding 1.5 plus a half than, more complicated fractions. And as we are introducing it in the context of this fifth grade level content, we can also bring in some of the fourth grade or third grade level content that you've seen that they are missing, and help them connect this idea of, oh, when I add 7 plus 5, I don't think of it as 7 plus 5. I think of it as 7 plus 3 to get to 10 plus 2 more. Like, and I'm speaking for myself. I literally do that in my head every time I'm adding 7 plus 5. And the same idea is happening when we're adding 1 and 7 tenths plus 5 tenths. 1 and 7 tenths plus 3 more tenths gets us to 2 wholes. Then I'm going to have 2 more tenths left from my 5 tenths, 2 and 2 tenths total. And so I think that there is opportunities to make that connection and to bring in those previous grade level content, or the holes that they have in the context of the fifth grade level content.
Mm-hmm.
And then really it helps them so much because now they're seeing the through line across how this is just how numbers work, that you can do this to them. You can break them apart to make them friendlier for yourself. And it's true with, these simple fact fluency problems, as well as these, more complicated addition and subtraction with fraction and decimal problems.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for them to see how it connects, because a lot of times
Yeah.
I think this was in my session maybe at NCTM last year, that we will teach something and students think like every time we start teaching something new that it's like, okay, something new. And it's like, oh no, wait, you have knowledge that you are bringing to the table, and students don't always see that. And so when we make the connection like you made with like, oh, 7 plus 5 and 7 tenths and 5 tenths, it's like you have knowledge that you're bringing to the table. We are just now applying it to a different set of numbers. And so I definitely think there's space to bring in some of these strategies. I'll just go ahead and give you like a little sneak peek, because next week is chapter 3 on page 65. There is, I think that's chapter 3. There is a fantastic chart. I literally wrote, love this chart right here. And it talks about how all of these strategies that kids are learning, honestly, in like kindergarten, first grade, how they apply to problems that we would see in fourth grade, fifth grade, in middle school. Such a fantastic chart. So I definitely recommend checking that out. Okay, last question, because we're almost at time. Okay, actually, you know what? Because we are getting close to time, I'm going to save this question for next time. I will say this is all about like, how do we bring in like other voices, people who, are not bought in. I will say that there
Mhm.
is a chapter that talks about family engagement that we're going to get to. And I think those same ideas apply to other teachers as well. There was an activity on page 21 that was really good. I think it was the act it out, I think on page 21. But I will, Christy, you'll have to remind me. I'm going to save this question. We're going to do another, add this to the Q&A for another week, because I'm sure it will continue to come up, is like, how do we get teachers and parents on board with this? So,
Yeah.
um, someone asked what page was the chart on again? Page 65. Okay, we are
Right.
at the hour. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you are just feeling really excited, even if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed. I hope you are feeling really excited about the learning that's going to come from the rest of the book. This really just scratched the surface. It rocked our world, and now we're going to start to get into the chapters that really give us that like roadmap and path forward with all of this. So I saw a couple of questions. One was asking about how to get the newsletter. It is just mixandmath.com/newsletter. And if you email in, some people were asking about the list of questions, just email hello@mixandmath.com. We'd be happy to send you one of the previous newsletters, the one that had the questions in it. Kirsten's in our inbox and she's wonderful. And then others were asking about the workshop. The workshop is just mixandmath.com/workshop. But we are here for you. We're so thankful that you joined us tonight. Next week, we are reading chapter 3. I will be chatting with John Sangiovanni, who is one of the authors of the book. So make sure you join us next week for that. But thank y'all so much. And Christy, thank you for joining me tonight.
Of course. And okay, before we leave, we do have to shout out. So Katie, who is our wonderful, she's our project manager for Mix and Math. She mentioned that there is somebody who is joining us, or maybe a group that's joining us from South Africa today. And I just was like,
Oh, wow.
chills, because I was like, just this whole like this idea that somebody is like going online. It's like the middle of the night there in South Africa that you're joining us. So if that's you and you're still in the chat and you're still here, please say hello, because thank you so much for joining us. Not to say that people who are joining us from, the same state is not important as well, but just this whole idea that you were so dedicated that you are watching us in the middle of the night. Just thank you.
Yes, I think we have 4,800 teachers signed up doing this book.
Yep.
And the number of teachers that are going to be, or number of students who are going to be impacted from that is just wild. So we appreciate y'all. We're thankful for you. We will see you next week, and we cannot wait to talk math with you again very soon. Bye, everyone.